My name is Calloway Briggs and I am 33 years old. 4 years ago, my mother stood at the front of a church fellowship hall in Decatur, Georgia, in front of 62 people. My father's colleagues, his oldest friends, the men and women who had worked beside him for 30 years, and told every single one of them that the reason my father had been quietly removed from the engineering firm he co-founded was because of me. She said I had gone to the partners behind his back. She said I had handed over documents I had no right to share. She said I had done it out of jealousy, out of spite, out of a hunger to tear down the only parent who had ever truly believed in me. She said all of this at his retirement dinner. The retirement dinner I had planned. The one I had booked the venue for, ordered the centerpieces for, written the invitations for. I was sitting at table 3, second chair from the left, in a navy wrap dress I had bought on clearance for $47, and I did not make a sound while she spoke. I counted the seconds. I counted 14 of them before the room began to shift, before people started glancing toward me with that particular expression, half pity, half suspicion, that I had been watching cross people's faces my entire life. But here is what my mother did not know. 3 weeks before that dinner, I had received a package in the mail from my father's attorney. Inside was a sealed letter, a USB drive, and a handwritten note on graph paper in my father's unmistakable drafting print. The note said 4 words, "Keep this safe, Cal." I had not opened the letter yet. I had been waiting. I did not know, sitting at that table in my $47 dress, that I was about to understand exactly what I had been waiting for. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story is speaking to something real in you. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I genuinely read those. I love knowing where people are when they find their way to a story like this. Now let me take you back 22 years, to a split-level house in Marietta, Georgia, and to the specific smell of my father's drafting table. Cedar pencil shavings and something faintly chemical, like blueprint paper left in the sun. My father, Gerald Briggs, was a structural engineer. Not the kind who sits in a glass office and reviews other people's calculations. The kind who shows up to a job site at 6 in the morning with mud on his boots and a rolled set of drawings under his arm, who can look at a concrete pour and tell you in under a minute whether the aggregate ratio is wrong. He had co-founded Briggs Calloway Structural Group with his college roommate, Dennis Calloway. Yes, that is where my name comes from. When I was 3 years old. By the time I was 11, the firm had 40 employees and a reputation across the Southeast for bridge work and public infrastructure. My father was proud of that in the way quiet men are proud of things they built with their hands. He did not talk about it much. He just kept building. My mother, Patricia, was a different kind of person. She was bright and social and had a gift for making rooms feel warm, which is a real gift, a valuable one, and I want to be fair about that. But she had a way of organizing the world into categories, the impressive and the not impressive, the wordy and the not quite, and those categories had a way of shifting depending on who was in the room. When my father's partners came to dinner, she was charming and attentive and spoke about the firm with a fluency that suggested she understood it deeply. When they left, she would sometimes say things like, "Dennis is going to outgrow Gerald eventually." Gerald doesn't think big enough. I heard her say that when I was 9. I was sitting at the top of the stairs in my pajamas, not quite asleep, and the words came up through the floor the way words do in old houses. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I understood the tone. I had heard it directed at me often enough to recognize it. My older brother, Preston, was 4 years ahead of me and had inherited my mother's ease with rooms. He was handsome in a conventional way, quick with a joke, the kind of person teachers liked on instinct. My mother adored him in a way that was not subtle. His drawings went on the refrigerator. Mine. And I drew constantly, floor plans and bridges and cross-sections of things I had taken apart to see how they worked. Mine went in a folder she kept in the hall closet. For safekeeping, she said. I understood, even at 8, that safekeeping was not the same as display. My father saw what I was doing. He was the one who bought me the drafting kit when I was 10. A real one, not a toy set, with a parallel ruler and a set of technical pens in a zippered case. He set it up on a corner of his own drafting table and showed me how to hold the pen at the right angle, how to letter in the architectural style, how to think about a structure from the foundation up rather than from the outside in. Most people see a building, he told me once, sitting beside me on his tall stool while I traced a load diagram. You look at a building and you want to know why it's still standing. That's the right question, Cal. That's always the right question. Preston went to the University of Georgia on a partial athletic scholarship for baseball. My mother drove him there herself, helped him set up his dorm room, cried in the parking lot. When I was accepted to Georgia Tech 3 years later, full merit scholarship, civil engineering, one of 11 women in my incoming cohort, my mother said, "That's wonderful, Calloway." Very practical. She did not come to orientation. She said she had a prior commitment. I drove myself in our second car, a 2003 Civic with a broken passenger side mirror, with everything I owned in the back seat and a box of drafting supplies wedged against the spare tire. I want to be careful here, because I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because the shape of a family's love, where it pools and where it drains away, is something a child learns to read before she has the words for it. I learned to read it early. And I learned, sitting in my father's study on weekend afternoons while he walked me through load calculations and stress diagrams, that the place where I was seen was not the dinner table or the school play or the family vacation. It was that drafting table. That was where I existed fully. I graduated from Georgia Tech in May of 2013 with a 3.91 GPA and a thesis on seismic retrofitting of pre-1970 concrete bridges that my advisor submitted to a regional engineering journal. It was published 6 months later. My father framed the journal page. He hung it in his office at Briggs Calloway. My mother did not mention it. I went to work for a civil engineering firm in Atlanta called Harwick and Associates. Not my father's firm, because he had insisted on that, said it would be better for me to build my own credibility first, said the industry was small and people would always wonder if I had earned my position or inherited it. He was right about that, as he was right about most structural things. I spent 4 years at Harwick doing bridge assessment work, learning the regulatory side of infrastructure, sitting in county commissioner meetings and state DOT hearings until I understood not just how structures were built but how they were approved, funded, and maintained over decades. In 2017, I passed my professional engineer licensure exam on the first attempt. I was 27 years old. I called my father from the parking lot of the testing center. He picked up on the second ring and said, "I knew you would." That was all. It was enough. What I did not know, during those 4 years at Harwick, was that things at Briggs Calloway were changing. My father had told me the firm was growing, which was true. But he had not told me about the disagreements with Dennis Calloway over the direction of the firm, about the outside investors Dennis had brought in without a full partner vote, about the new contracts that were being signed in ways that made my father uncomfortable. He did not tell me because he was trying to protect me from it, the way he had always tried to protect me. Not from difficulty, but from the specific kind of ugliness that comes when people you have trusted for 30 years begin to move in ways you do not recognize. In the spring of 2019, I was 29 years old, and my father called me on a Tuesday evening and asked if I could come by the house that weekend. Not the office. The house. He said he needed to talk to me about something and he wanted to do it in person. I drove to Marietta on a Saturday morning in March, and I found him in his study, at his drafting table, with a set of documents spread out in front of him that I could see from the doorway were not drawings. They were financial records. Contracts. Correspondence. He told me then. He told me that Dennis had been steering firm contracts toward a subcontractor in which Dennis held a silent ownership stake, a conflict of interest that had never been disclosed to the firm's other partners or to the clients. He told me he had discovered this through a discrepancy in a billing report, a small thing, the kind of thing only someone who had been reading financial documents for 30 years would catch. He had confronted Dennis privately. Dennis had denied it. My father had then quietly gathered documentation. He told me he was going to bring it to the firm's third partner, a woman named Rosalind Hatcher who had joined Briggs Calloway 8 years earlier and whom my father trusted. He was going to present the documentation and ask for a formal review. He did not want to go to outside counsel yet. He wanted to handle it inside the firm first, the way he handled everything, methodically, with documentation, without spectacle. I asked him if he wanted my help. He looked at me for a long moment, the way he did when he was calculating something, and then he said, "Not yet. But I want you to know it exists. I want someone outside this firm to know what I have." He pulled open the bottom drawer of his drafting table and showed me a manila envelope, thick, sealed with a metal clasp. "If something happens to me before this is resolved," he said, "you'll know where to look." I want to pause here for a moment, because I know some of you have been in a version of this room. Not this exact room. Not a drafting study in Marietta with engineering documents on the table, but the room where someone you love tells you something they have been carrying alone, and you realize for the first time how long they have been carrying it. I know some of you have watched a parent fight something quietly, without asking for help, without letting the weight show, because that is what their generation was taught to do. If that is resonating with you right now, drop the word steady in the comments. Just that one word. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, Please do. Because what happens next is the part of this story that I am still, for years later, trying to fully understand. Now, back to the story. What happened next did not happen the way my father had planned. He brought his documentation to Rosalind in April of 2019. Rosalind reviewed it. She agreed the conflict of interest was real and serious. She agreed it needed to be addressed. What my father did not know, what neither of them knew, was that Dennis had already been speaking to the outside investors he had brought into the firm, had already been building a case of his own, and his case was about my father. Dennis's version of events, which he presented to the investors and to a law firm he had retained without the other partners' knowledge, was that Gerald Briggs had been mismanaging the firm's engineering review process, that projects had been approved with insufficient documentation, that my father had been cutting corners on structural assessments to meet client timelines, and that the firm's liability exposure was significant. It was a preemptive strike. It was a way of muddying the water before my father's documentation could land clearly. I did not learn any of this in real time. I learned it in pieces, over months, the way you learn things when you are not in the room where they are happening. My father called me periodically with updates that were careful and measured and, I understood later, deliberately incomplete. He did not want me to do anything. He wanted me to know, but not to act. In August of 2019, the firm's board, which now included the outside investors Dennis had brought in, voted to place my father on administrative leave pending a review of his project documentation. The vote was 3-2. Rosalind voted against it. My father accepted the leave without public protest. He came home to Marietta and sat at his drafting table and did not draw anything for 6 weeks. I drove to Marietta every weekend that fall. I sat with him in the evenings. We did not always talk. Sometimes I just sat in the study while he read, the way I had sat there as a child, and the silence between us was the same silence it had always been, not empty, but full of the particular understanding that passes between two people who think in similar ways about similar things. My mother, during this period, was focused on something else entirely. Preston had started a real estate development company 2 years earlier, and it was struggling. My mother had invested a significant amount of her own money from her personal savings account, not from the household finances, into Preston's company, and the company was not performing. She was worried about Preston. She spoke about Preston constantly. She organized family dinners that were really strategy sessions about how to help Preston, what connections my father still had that might benefit Preston, whether my father could recommend Preston's company to any of the firm's clients. My father listened to these conversations with patience. He did not say what I could see him thinking. I saw him thinking it in the set of his jaw, in the way he would pick up a pencil and turn it in his fingers, a habit he had when he was containing something. In December of 2019, the firm's review concluded. The outside investigators found no evidence of the mismanagement Dennis had alleged. My father's documentation and project records were thorough and compliant. He was cleared. But the partnership was finished. The relationship between my father and Dennis had corroded past repair, and the outside investors used the disruption as leverage to restructure the firm's ownership. My father negotiated a buyout of his stake. He left Briggs Calloway Structural Group in January of 2020, 30 years after he had co-founded it, with a settlement that was fair by legal standards and devastating by every other measure. He was 61 years old. He was not ready to retire. But he was done fighting. He spent the next 2 years consulting independently. Small projects, county contracts, the kind of work that kept his mind engaged but did not require him to rebuild a practice from nothing. He seemed, from the outside, to have found a kind of peace with it. He told me once, sitting on the back porch in the spring of 2021, "I built something real for 30 years, Cal. They can reorganize the ownership all they want. They can't reorganize what those bridges are still doing." I held on to that. I have held on to it since. In the fall of 2021, my father was diagnosed with a cardiac arrhythmia. It was manageable with medication, not immediately life-threatening, but it required monitoring and some adjustment to his activity level. He took it seriously. He started walking every morning. He reduced his consulting hours. He seemed, if anything, more settled than he had been in years, as though the enforced slowdown had given him permission to simply exist without building. It was during this period that he called his attorney, a man named Warren Okafor who had handled his personal legal matters for over a decade, and updated his estate documents. He also, I learned later, gave Warren a sealed package with instructions for its delivery. The package was to be sent to me, and only to me, 30 days before any formal retirement or farewell event that my family planned in his honor. I did not know about this instruction. I did not know Warren had been holding the package. I did not know, when I began planning my father's retirement dinner in the spring of 2023, that the moment I booked the venue, Warren's 30-day clock had started. The package arrived on a Wednesday in early March of 2023. I was at my desk at the firm where I had been working as a senior bridge assessment engineer for 3 years, a firm called Tatum Infrastructure Partners in Atlanta, nothing to do with my father's old practice. The package was a padded envelope with my father's return address and Warren Okafor's firm name in the corner. Inside was the USB drive, the sealed letter, and the graph paper note in my father's drafting print, "Keep this safe, Cal." I set the letter on my kitchen counter that evening and looked at it for a long time. I did not open it that night. I did not open it the next night either. I understood, in some way I cannot fully explain, that opening it would change the texture of the time I had left before the dinner. I wanted to move through those weeks with the same steadiness I had always tried to carry. I would open it when I needed to. Not before. The dinner was scheduled for April 14, 2023, a Friday evening, at the Whitmore Fellowship Hall in Decatur, a space attached to the church my father had attended for 25 years, a place he loved, with long wooden tables and tall windows that let in the late afternoon light in a way that always made the room feel like something important was about to happen. I had reserved it 4 months in advance. I had ordered centerpieces, small arrangements of white freesia and eucalyptus, because those were the flowers my father's mother had always kept on her kitchen table, and he had mentioned that once, years ago, and I had remembered. I had written and mailed 62 invitations. I had arranged for a caterer. I had asked 3 of my father's longest colleagues to prepare brief remarks. My mother had been involved in the planning in the way she was involved in most things, present at the edges, offering suggestions that were really redirections, asking questions that were really critiques. She had wanted to hold the dinner at a hotel ballroom. I had said the fellowship hall was where my father would want it, and I had been right about that. And she had accepted it in the way she accepted things she disagreed with but could not argue against directly. Preston had offered to help and had contributed nothing. This was consistent. I opened my father's letter on the Sunday before the dinner, April 9, 2023. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I read. The letter was 4 pages, written in the same careful drafting print as the note, on plain white paper. I am not going to read the whole letter to you. Some of it belongs only to me. But I will tell you what was in it. My father had, in the months after leaving Briggs Calloway, quietly completed a full independent analysis of every project Dennis's subcontractor had worked on during the years of the undisclosed conflict of interest. He had pulled public records, permit filings, inspection reports. He had documented, with the thoroughness of a man who had spent 30 years making sure structures would not fall, every instance where the subcontractor's work had been approved with documentation that did not meet the standards my father would have required. 11 projects. 4 counties. 1 bridge assessment that he believed warranted a formal reinspection by the state DOT. He had given this analysis to Warren Okafor with instructions that it be delivered to the Georgia State Board of Professional Engineers if 2 conditions were met. First, that my father had passed away or become incapacitated and could no longer submit it himself, or second, that any member of his family attempted to publicly misrepresent the circumstances of his departure from Briggs Calloway. He had not submitted it himself because he did not want the last chapter of his professional life to be a formal complaint. He had built things. He did not want to be remembered for tearing something down. But he had prepared it. He had documented it. And he had given it to me, not to act on, but to understand. To know what he had known. To carry the truth with me even if it never needed to be spoken aloud. The USB drive contained the full analysis. 214 pages of engineering documentation, cross-referenced and indexed in a way that was unmistakably my father's. Organized the way a man organizes things when he wants them to be found and understood by someone who thinks the way he does. I sat with that for a long time. I thought about my father at 61, cleared of allegations he should never have faced, leaving a firm he had built with his own hands, coming home to a drafting table he no longer used in the same way. I thought about the patience it had taken to compile that analysis in silence, to give it to a lawyer with careful instructions, to trust that the right moment would come or would not come and that either way the truth would be preserved. I made a copy of everything on a second drive. I put the original in a fireproof box in my closet. I put the copy in my work bag. And I went to my father's retirement dinner on April 14, 2023, in my navy wrap dress, and I sat at table 3. And I waited to see what the evening would bring. The fellowship hall looked exactly right. The freesia and eucalyptus were on every table. The late afternoon light came through the tall windows the way it always did. 62 people filled the room. Engineers, former clients, city planners, a few old friends from the neighborhood, the pastor who had known my father for 2 decades. My father sat at the head table in a charcoal suit I had not seen before, and he looked, for the first time in 4 years, like himself. Preston arrived 20 minutes late with his wife and sat at the table nearest the door. My mother sat beside my father at the head table, in a cream blouse and a pearl bracelet, and she worked the room before the dinner started with the ease of someone who had been doing it her whole life. The meal was good. The remarks from my father's colleagues were genuine and specific and occasionally funny in the way that engineers are funny, precise, understated, built around a single well-chosen detail. My father laughed 3 times, real laughs, the kind that reach his eyes. I watched him from table 3 and felt something I can only describe as relief, as though the evening were going to be exactly what I had intended it to be. Then my mother stood up. She had not been on the program. I had not asked her to speak, and she had not told me she intended to. She simply stood, picked up her water glass, and said, "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment." The room quieted. My father looked at her with an expression I could not read from where I was sitting. She spoke for approximately 4 minutes. I counted the seconds of the first part. I got to 22 before I stopped counting and simply listened. She began by thanking everyone for coming, by saying how proud she was of Gerald's career, how much he had sacrificed for the firm and for the family. This was the expected part. This was the part one had anticipated. Then she said that she wanted to address something that had been weighing on her, something she felt the people in this room deserved to understand. She said that Gerald's departure from Briggs Calloway had been a painful chapter, one that had involved, she was sorry to say, a betrayal from within the family. She said that documents had been shared with the firm's partners without Gerald's knowledge or consent, documents that had been used to build the case against him. She said she had not wanted to believe it for a long time, but she had come to understand that the source of those documents had been someone Gerald trusted completely. She did not say my name. She did not have to. She was looking at me when she said it. And the room, 62 people, turned to follow her gaze. My hands were flat on the table. I noticed that. I noticed that they were not shaking. I looked back at my mother across the room and I did not look away. She sat down. The room was very quiet. Someone coughed. My father was very still. I want to stop here for a moment, because I need to speak to you directly. If you have ever been in a room where someone told a lie about you in public, not a small misunderstanding, not a confusion, but a deliberate, constructed lie, told in front of people whose opinion of you matters, told by someone who is supposed to love you, then you know what the next few seconds feel like. You know that particular stillness. The way the air changes. The way your own face becomes something you have to consciously manage. I have thought about what my mother's motivation was many times in the 4 years since that evening. I have sat with it the way you sit with a structure you are trying to understand, looking for the load path, trying to find where the stress is actually concentrated. I think she believed some version of what she said. I think she had built a story over 4 years that explained my father's departure in a way that protected Preston, protected her investment in Preston's company, protected the narrative she had always maintained about which of her children was the valuable one. I think she had told that story to herself so many times that she had stopped being able to see it clearly. I am not telling you this to excuse her. I am telling you this because understanding the structure of something is not the same as forgiving it. I understand the structure. That is different. If you have ever had to sit still while someone rewrote your history in front of witnesses, drop the word witness in the comments. Just that. I want to know you're there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment, because what I did next is the part of this story that my father has never fully talked about, even now. Now, back to the room. I stood up. I did not speak immediately. I picked up the USB drive from my bag. I had brought it. I had known I might need it. I had not known I would need it like this. And I held it in my hand for a moment. Then I looked at my father. Dad, I said, I need to ask you something directly, in front of these people. Did you ever give me documents from Briggs Calloway to share with the partners or with anyone else? My father looked at me. His voice was very quiet. No, he said. I did not. Did you ever ask me to do anything that could have harmed the firm or your position in it? No. I nodded. I looked at the room. 62 people, very still. My mother had her hands folded on the table in front of her and she was watching me with an expression I recognized. The expression of someone who has made a move and is waiting to see how the board responds. I want to tell you something about my father, I said. Not about the firm, and not about the circumstances of his departure. I want to tell you about what he did after. I told them about the analysis. Not all of it. I did not read 214 pages at a retirement dinner, but the shape of it. I told them that my father had spent the better part of a year, after being cleared of allegations that should never have been made, quietly and methodically documenting what he had found. I told them that he had done this not to pursue a complaint, not to protect himself financially, but because he was an engineer, and engineers do not leave a structural problem undocumented. I told them that the documentation existed, that it was thorough, that it was in the hands of his attorney with instructions for its use. I told them that I had received this documentation 3 weeks ago, in a package my father had arranged to be sent to me before this evening, and that I had read it, and that there was not a single page of it that suggested anything other than what my father had always been: meticulous, thorough, and right. I did not say my mother was lying. I did not say the word lie at any point. I did not raise my voice. I stood at table 3 in my $47 dress and I spoke in the same register I use in county commissioner meetings, the same register I use when I am presenting a bridge assessment to a state DOT panel: clear, measured, specific. When I finished, I sat down. My voice had not wavered. I noted that. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Rosalind Hatcher, who had driven from Savannah for this dinner, who had voted against my father's administrative leave 4 years earlier, who had sent me a card when I passed my PE exam that I still have in my desk drawer, Rosalind Hatcher said, from her seat near the window. Gerald, I want you to know that I have never believed anything different than what your daughter just said. My father looked at the table. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried in public. But his hand, which was resting on the tablecloth, closed slowly into a fist and then opened again, and I understood what that meant. My mother did not speak again for the remainder of the evening. Preston left early, before dessert, with some excuse about a drive. My father and I stayed until the last guest had gone, until the caterers had cleared the tables and the freesia and eucalyptus had been boxed up to take home. We stood in the parking lot of the fellowship hall in the April evening, and he put his hand on my shoulder the way he had when I was 10 years old and had just finished my first clean load diagram. How long have you had the package? He asked. 3 weeks. He nodded. I wasn't sure you'd use it. I wasn't either, I said. Until she stood up. He was quiet for a moment. I should have told you more. Earlier. About all of it. You told me what I needed to know, I said. You told me to keep it safe. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw in his face what I had always seen there. The particular recognition of one person who thinks in a certain way seeing another person who thinks in the same way. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter than pride. Something more like acknowledgement. You asked the right questions, he said. That is the highest thing my father knows how to say. I have carried it since. In the weeks after the dinner, things moved in the way that things move when the truth has been put on record in front of witnesses. Rosalind Hatcher contacted Warren Okafor and asked to review the documentation my father had compiled. She was still a licensed PE in Georgia. She had standing to file a complaint with the state board if she believed the documentation warranted it. My father gave his consent. Warren transferred the analysis. The Georgia State Board of Professional Engineers opened a formal inquiry into the bridge assessment my father had flagged, the one he believed warranted reinspection, in June of 2023. The inquiry was ongoing for 11 months. I will not tell you the outcome in detail because some of it is still part of the public record and some of it is not my story to tell completely. What I will tell you is that the state DOT conducted a reinspection of the bridge in question, and that the reinspection identified a deficiency in the original documentation that required remediation work. No one was hurt. The bridge was not in immediate danger. But the deficiency was real, and it was documented, and it was addressed. Dennis Calloway retired from active engineering practice in the fall of 2023. He did not make a public statement. The firm he had restructured was acquired by a larger infrastructure company the following spring. My mother called me in July of 2023, 3 months after the dinner. She did not apologize. She said she had been thinking about what I had said and she felt I had embarrassed the family in front of people who mattered. I listened to her say this. I did not argue. When she finished, I said, I think we understand each other's positions. Then I said goodbye and I ended the call. She has not called since. I do not know if she will. I have stopped trying to predict what she will do, because I have come to understand that I cannot build a structure on a foundation that shifts. Some ground is not load-bearing. You learn that and you build somewhere else. Preston sent me an email in December of 2023. It was 3 sentences. He said he had been thinking about the dinner. He said he knew he had not been a fair brother to me. He said he was sorry. I read it 4 times. I believed him. I wrote back 2 sentences, that I appreciated him saying it, and that I hoped his company found steadier footing. I meant both things. My father turned 65 last October. He is still consulting, 2 or 3 projects a year, small things, the kind that let him keep his hands in the work without the weight of a full practice. He walks every morning. He has a new drafting table in a study that gets better light than the old one. When I visit, which is most months, we sit at that table sometimes, and he shows me what he is working on, and I show him what I am working on, and we talk about load paths and material tolerances and the particular elegance of a well-designed structure that will outlast the people who built it. He told me something last spring that I have been thinking about since. We were looking at a set of drawings for a pedestrian bridge over a creek in a county park. A small project, nothing that would appear in any publication, just a bridge that people would use to walk from one side of a park to the other without thinking about it. He said, "The best structures are the ones people forget are there. They just work. They hold. Nobody thinks about why." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. I thought about the years I had spent being invisible in my family, and about how invisibility had felt like a wound for so long, and about how it had also, quietly, been a kind of preparation. I had learned to work without an audience. I had learned to build things that held without needing anyone to notice. I had learned, from the man at the drafting table, that the right question is always why it is still standing, not who gets credit for it. I am 33 years old. I have been a licensed professional engineer for 6 years. I work on bridges. I think about them the way my father taught me to think about them, from the foundation up, from the load path out, from the question of what it will take to make something last. I have a small apartment in Atlanta with good light and a drafting table of my own in the corner of the 2nd bedroom. I have a colleague named Priya who has been my closest friend for 4 years and who was the first person I called after the retirement dinner, who listened to the whole story without interrupting, and who said when I finished, "You did exactly right." I have my father's graph paper note in a frame on my desk. 4 words in his drafting print: "Keep this safe, Cal." I keep it safe. I keep all of it safe. If you are watching this and you recognize something in it, if you have been the one in your family who was handed the $47 dress while someone else got the display case, if you have been the one who built things quietly while someone else took the credit or rewrote the story, if you have ever sat in a room while someone told a lie about you in front of witnesses and had to decide in real time what your stillness was worth, I want you to know something. The documentation matters. The truth, kept carefully, in the right hands, with the right instructions, will find its moment. It does not always find it on the timeline you would choose. It does not always look the way you imagined. But the structures that are built correctly, that are load-bearing, that are true to the materials, Those are the ones that are still standing when everything else has been reorganized around them. My father's bridges are still standing. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Thank you for being here with me tonight, wherever you are. If this story reached something real in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.